Hi there, everyone. How you doing? It's Jeff C. It is Saturday, March the 15th, and you're listening to Free Radio Revolution. And are we heading towards a collapse? Now, we've talked about it many times before. We believe, or I believe, that an economic collapse is all but inevitable, especially at the rate that the psychopathic banksters and zombie banks are sucking all this money out of our economy. But is there a greater collapse in the cards ahead for humanity? Well, considering all the doomsday prepper shows, zombie apocalypse predictions, perhaps our media is trying to prep us for something, apocalyptic that might happen in the near future. Here off the Guardian Times, I came across this article, Earth Insight by Nafeez Ahmed. NASA funded study, industrial civilization headed for irreversible collapse. Natural and social scientists develop a new model of how perfect storm of crisis could unravel the global system. So they actually show a photo here of North America and a storm in the central of North America, and they talk a little bit about global warming, which I think is a complete hoax. But let's take a look at this article and see what they're talking about. A new study sponsored by NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center has highlighted the prospect that global industrial civilization could collapse in coming decades due to unsustainable resource exploitation and increasingly unequal wealth distribution. Well, I gotta say, yes, unsustainable resource exploitation. I mean, humanity has been extracting every possible resource that we can from poor old Mother Nature for as long as we've had shovels. And increasingly unequal wealth distribution, well, you can just look at the charts that are out there that show an unprecedented sort of divide between the rich and the poor. I mean, I think you all know that, right? The gap has never been so enormous. Noting that warnings of collapse are often seen to be fringe or controversial, the study attempts to make sense of compelling historical data showing that the process, this is in quotes, of rise and collapse is actually a recurrent cycle found throughout history. Cases of severe civilizational disruption due to precipitous collapse, often lasting centuries, have been quite common. Yeah, I think any of us who have studied history, I majored in history in university, and it's cyclical. And of course the famous quotes being that those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Well, we can see it once again with the American civilization. You see the telltale signs, the social decay, as they said, the incredible gap between the rich and the poor. The culture is one of the greatest sort of indicators of society and where it is. You could see the decadence and over-the-top violence that plagued Roman civilization in the last couple hundred years that it existed before, of course, the Byzantine Empire rose further east. But this is cyclical. It happens all the time. I have been predicting for far back as I can remember that the United States is in a slow decline. Not even a slow decline. I think the decline of the United States is actually speeding up quite a bit. And as I said, the cultural sort of telltale signs are all there. Of course, the banksters running the United States and the Ponzi scheme, that they've got, where they're sucking all the money, and of course they want to collapse the dollar eventually, right? So these are all the things that so they can come in with their neocon solution there with a global currency perhaps, or maybe just a regional currency, the Amero, as Aaron Russo warned us about. So here, looking a bit more into it, the research project is based on a new cross-disciplinary human and nature dynamical, which they call the HANDY model, led by applied mathematician Safa Motasheri of the U.S. National Science Foundation supported National Social Environmental Synthesis Center. So they're putting it all together with the global warming, in association with a team of natural and social scientists. It finds that according to the historical record, even advanced complex civilizations are susceptible to collapse, raising questions about the sustainability of modern civilization. Here, actually, they're talking right about the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire and equally, if not more, advanced Han Mauryan Gupta empires, as well as many advanced Mesopotamian empires, are all testimony to the fact that advanced, sophisticated, complex, and creative civilizations can be both fragile and impermanent. Absolutely. If you study history, you'll see it over and over and over again. By investigating the human nature dynamics of these past cases collapse, the project identifies the most salient interrelated factors which explain civilizational decline and which may help determine the risk of collapse today, namely population, climate, water, agriculture, and energy. All the perfect storm. As I said, I don't believe in the climate part, but I can say that water, like for instance Phoenix, a city of 5 million plus people, right in the middle of a desert where they have to import water from hundreds of miles away along these long aqueducts, you're just begging for disaster. That city would dry up within days and people would be dying. So that's just a little example. These factors can lead to collapse when they converge to generate two crucial social features: the stretching of resources due to the strain placed on the ecological carrying capacity, and the economic stratification of society into elites, rich, and the masses, commoners, poor. These social phenomena have played a central role in the character or in the process of the collapse in all such cases over the last 5,000 years. This is totally true, this part at least. You see it again and again if you study history. The United States is in a collapse. It's kind of a, well, I wouldn't even say it's a slow collapse. I would have said that maybe back in the 90s or something like that, but today it seems like it's on an accelerated collapse. Of course, engineering the collapse are these psychopathic banksters who want to bring in these solutions like one world currency in order to bring in their new world order. So perhaps that a lot of this collapse, I believe, is being engineered, and they want this to happen. So perhaps the Guardian is there to kind of give us the warning that it's coming. Boy, we've got so much troubles in the world. Too bad Bob's not around anymore to sing about it. Currently, high levels of economic stratification are linked directly to overconsumption of resources, with elites based largely in industrialized countries responsible for both. Yes, absolutely. Quote, accumulated surplus is not evenly distributed throughout society, but rather has been controlled by an elite, the mass of the population, while producing the wealth is only allocated a small portion of it by the elites, usually at or just above subsistence levels. Yes, it's absolutely true. I mean, so many people needing food stamps. Of course, we can talk about the poor, but we can even talk about the middle class and group them with the poor now. Everyone's in debt. Nobody really seems to own anything because you're always paying off everything that everybody lives beyond their means. You're sold the lifestyle by the credit card companies, by the banks, the loan sharks, everything else. They want you to have that car, they want you to have that swimming pool, but they want you to pay for it forever, and they want you to pay interest on everything that you buy. We live in a real sick society that lives way beyond its means and consumes far more than is necessary for us to be, a functioning civilization. In fact, less is more. You hear that phrase all the time. Less television would be a lot smarter for a lot of people. Less crap, less watching garbage on YouTube. This is those who argue that technology will resolve these challenges by increasingly efficiency. Technological change can raise the efficiency of resource use, but it also tends to raise both per capita resource consumption and the scale of resource extraction, so that absent policy effects, the increases in consumption often compensate for the increased efficiency of resource use. Yeah, it's basically saying the more advanced you become, the more you're going to use resources, the more things you'll take for granted, the more you'll waste, the more you'll produce crap, and the more you'll extract things from Mother Earth. Productivity increases in agriculture and industry over the last 2 centuries has come from increased rather than decreased source throughputs, despite dramatic efficiency gains over the same period. Modeling a range of different scenarios, Motasheri and his colleagues conclude that under conditions closely reflecting the reality of the world today, we find that a collapse is difficult to avoid. Civilization, appears to be on a sustainable path for quite a long time, but even using an optimal depletion rate and starting with very small number of elites, the elites eventually consume too much, resulting in famine amongst commoners that eventually causes the collapse of society. It is important to note that this type L collapse is due to an inequality-induced famine that causes a loss of workers rather than a collapse of nature. Another scenario focuses on the role of continued resource exploitation, finding that larger depletion rate, the decline of commoners occurs fast while elites are still thriving, but eventually the commoners collapse completely, followed by the elites, because they can't exist without us. But of course, I guess their plan is to put robots in to replace us, so that they can have a world where they're serviced by robots and carry out their eugenicist dreamland with a population of about 500 million, most of who would be brain-dead slaves. Both scenarios, elite wealth monopolies mean that they are buffered from the most detrimental effects of environmental collapse until much later than the commoners. Of course, they are hedging their bets every single day by having all the gold, having all kinds of artwork, all these things that will not lose their value as much as other things, allowing them to continue business as usual despite the impending catastrophe, perhaps even for a few generations. The same mechanism, they argue, could explain how historical collapses were allowed to occur by elites who appear to be oblivious to the catastrophic trajectory. Most clearly apparent in the Roman and Mayan cases. Yes, because they live so much in a different world. I mean, what you got? Branson going around in his private jets and his island mansions and stuff like that, going up into space and taking celebrities with them. Everything's great, eh? Making capital, making the world work. It's awesome. You can have breakfast in New York and have lunch in Paris and then have dinner in Spain or something, right? You'll just fly around your private jet. It's exactly what these people do. Applying this lesson to our contemporary predicament, the study warns that while some members of society might raise the alarm that the system is moving towards an impending collapse and therefore advocate structural changes to society in order to avoid it, elites and their supporters who opposed making these changes could point to the long sustainable trajectory so far in support of doing nothing. They've got the sheeple all in control. It's business as usual. Day by day we see all the signs of this collapse, and yet the sheeple are there spending their weekends, with their sports, really just losing themselves in the madness that is present-day culture. However, scientists point out that the worst-case scenarios are by no means inevitable and suggested that appropriate policy and structural changes could avoid collapse, if not pave the way towards a more stable solution. I really totally disagree. I think it's inevitable. The two key solutions are to reduce economic inequality, fat chance of that happening. No chance of that happening. So as to ensure fairer distribution of resources and to dramatically reduce resource consumption by relying on less intensive renewable resources and reducing population growth. Yes, is this an Agenda 21 article? Starting to smell like it, is it not? Here's a quote. Collapse can be avoided and population can reach equilibrium if a capita rate of depletion of nature is reduced to a sustainable level and if resources are distributed in a reasonably equitable fashion. The only way that's going to happen is if they bring in their Agenda 21 and lower the population. A NASA-funded handy model offers a highly credible wake-up call to governments, corporations, and businesses and consumers to recognize that business as usual cannot be sustained and that policy and structural changes are required immediately. Agenda 21 is your savior. Although the study is largely theoretical, a number of more empirically focused studies, the KPMG and the UK Government Office of Science, for instance, have warned that the convergence of food, water, and energy crisis could create the perfect storm within about 15 years. But these business-as-usual forecasts could be very conservative. Well, strikes me as an Agenda 21 pro sort of article here, putting people into fear. I think there's a lot of truth to this article. I'm going to put the links below to read it, but I also think there's a lot of programming that goes into when it's programming for Agenda 21. I think that this kind of article is conditioning people for. I mean, it's true. A lot of what's happening is 100% true. A lot of what's said in this article is true. But a lot of it is also to put fear in you so you can accept these changes, which really, if you look at Agenda 21, it's going to require a massive population reduction. So they'll probably be the worst genocidal monsters in the history of humanity if they really do have a plan to reduce the population.